Okay. Boker Tov. Good morning. I'm going to assume that everybody is up and chipper as we gained an extra hour this last night. Probably most of you woke up a little early. I was actually considering giving the class a little bit earlier today, but we got busy. And this week we're back. We're back here in Coral Springs. The last 2 weeks we were traveling, so today we could give a bit of a longer class, as Sunday is not a Sunday morning. Torah and learning is about relaxing, and learning is not just about a little quickie. So first we always start with a bracha, some coffee. What could be better than a nice hot cup of coffee in frigid Florida? My grandchild asked this morning whether if he goes outside, will he freeze like in Antarctica? so thank God we are not in Antarctica, but it's a little frigid and chipper and nice. It's actually freshening up South Florida. So first we'll make a bracha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehakol niya bidvaro. In Yiddish we say Amachaya. Wonderful. And so let's get straight to our learning. So the beginning, if there's so much we could talk about, so let's get straight to it. The beginning of this week's portion, we always like to connect this week's portion with the portion that we just read yesterday. The Torah portion of this past week, or of today, let's start with today, is Vayetze Yaakov mi Be'ersheva. Yaakov left the city of Be'ersheva. Yaakov being the third of the patriarchs of our fathers. There's Abraham, there's Isaac, and there's Jacob, or Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. And Yaakov has to run away. He has to escape from his home because his brother Esau wants to kill him. His brother Esau wants to kill him. Just to read in last week's Torah portion, chapter 27, verse 42. I'm reading over here first the Hebrew, then the English. Vayugad leRivka as divrei Esav b'na hagadol. It was told. Rivka was told, and commentaries say she was told by divine inspiration, the words of Esau, her older son, which is that he said that I would like to go ahead and kill my brother. Now, why would he want to kill his own brother? That seems quite radical and harsh, etc., etc. Underscored. So what's going on in it? What's the story behind the story? So I'm sure many of you know the story. Some do not. So we will try to recap it very, very briefly of what is going on here. What is it that created such a deep resentment and hatred from Esau to his brother Jacob? In fact, when you read the Torah description of what went on, you cannot feel bad and empathy for Esau and what was done to him. In the week that we just read, we read the following story. Let me turn the page over here, and if you have a Chumash, a Bible, you're welcome to open it up as well. When we go to last week's Torah portion, we read the following. We read that it was when Isaac became old. Now, by the definition, but by the standards of his day, he wasn't that old. He was 127 years old, and he actually lived till 180. The reason why the Torah refers to him as old, because he reached close to the age of his mom. Close to the age of when his mom passed away. And because often, of course, we have sort of genetics from our parents, and here it also seems like there's also a spiritual element to it. The Talmud tells us, and Rashi brings it, that a person should be concerned about their life and when to start preparing if they are either 5 years before up to 5 years after one of their parents passing. And it's interesting that even medically today, 5 years is sort of like a marker of recovery, etc. So when Isaac reached within 5 years of his mother's passing, he was actually 123, I believe. His mom passed away at 127. So he started to be concerned and was starting to set the pace, or not set the pace, set the future of the Jewish people, meaning because it was Abraham, Isaac, and he has to pass it on to the next generation for all of history. So therefore, he goes ahead and he begins to prepare, and in doing so, he decides, as the Torah says, that let me go ahead and I would like to bless my child. Which child does he decide to bless? He decides to bless Esau. Because as the Torah relates, it says, Vayehav Yitzchak es Esav. Yitzchak loved and cherished Esau, and Rebekah, his wife, Aheves es Yaakov. Rebekah loves Jacob. So here you have two parents. One had an infinity, a love, an extra affection for Esau, which was who Isaac loved, and Rebekah realizes the greatness of Jacob, and she loves Jacob. So the Torah goes on to say that that Isaac, Yitzchak, goes ahead and he invites Esav to, he summons Esav, and he says to him, go ahead, go hunt for me an animal and make me food that I love, and so that I could bless you. And it's very, very clear that this is not just a regular blessing. It says, bring me a good steak, and I'll say thank you, and I'll give you a blessing. I'll say how wonderful you are. It's very clear from the Torah's narrative that this is a blessing that will determine who is the heir, who is the chain, who is the successor that will carry on the house of Abraham, the purpose and mission and the blessings that God gave to Abraham to pass on to Isaac, and the mission that God set into motion with the patriarchs, that this would now be passed on to whoever will receive these blessings. It is clear from the Torah that this is sort of a monumental moment in history in the link of our generation, of generations and history of the Jewish people. The Torah relates that Rebekah hears that which Isaac says to Esau, and she is determined and realizes that her husband chooses Esav, and that's not what's supposed to happen. And she makes the decision that the one who needs to get the blessing is Jacob. And she calls her son Jacob, and he says to her the following. Let's read from the Bible here again, okay? From the Chumash. She says, Rivka said to her son Yaakov, Jacob, look, I heard your father speaking to Esav, your brother, saying, bring me game, animal, food, and make me tasty food, and I will bless you before the death before God. Now, my son, listen to my voice, to what I am commanding you. Go now to the flock and take 2 of my choice kids, young goats, from there. And I will make one of them into tasty foods for your father, the type that he loves. You will bring them to your father to eat. For doing this, he will bless you before he dies. Yaakov said to Rivka, his mother, but my brother Esav is a hairy person, a lot of hair on his arms and all over his body, as the Torah earlier relates. And I am a smooth-skinned person. Maybe my father will feel me and see that I am an impostor. I will bring upon myself a curse and not a blessing. But his mother said to him, let your curse be on me. Alai kilalatcha b'ni. My son, listen to my voice, go and get the goats for me. And the Torah relates, Yaakov went ahead, he did so. And sure enough, Yaakov comes in, he tells his dad, I am Anochi Esav B'charecha, and what seems to be a bit of a sort of a squeezed interpretation, a little bit of a sort of pushed interpretation. Rashi says, he said, Anochi, it's me, meaning I'm Yaakov, and Esav, he is your firstborn. And basically, Yitzchak thinks that he's actually talking to Esau, even though the voice, as he himself says, the voice is Jacob's, but the Yadayim, the arms, are the arms of Esau. He goes ahead and he blesses him after a bit of an introduction. What's the introduction? Vayomer, he said, serve me so that I can eat my son's game. Then Yaakov, he says like that, then Yaakov, says the Torah, served him and he ate. He bought him wine and he drank. Now, incidentally, as a side point, but it's a nice point, we don't find Rebekah providing Jacob with wine for his father. We also don't find that Isaac even asked for wine. No detail in the Torah is superfluous. I mean, why is that even necessary? So, the Da'at Skenim Mibala Tosfot, one of the early commentaries on the Torah, says, and this is taken from the Medrash, and the Balatura mentions this, that where did he get this wine? He says this was very, very special wine. What was special about it? It wasn't French wine. It was wine, says the Balatura, says the Balatura man, the Da'at Skenim. It says this was wine that the angel Michael, the Malach Michael, the angel Michael brought him a bottle of wine, brought Jacob a bottle of wine from the Garden of Eden. And this is what he served to his father. So important was this blessing, and so important was it for Isaac to be totally sort of uplifted and inspired when he was giving this blessing, that a special bottle of wine was delivered from the Garden of Eden. I guess they have a stack of wine over there of top class. You can't get better than that. And that bottle of wine was provided to Yaakov to give to his dad. And then, and this is what I want to focus on a little bit. Then it says like this, Vayigash, Vayomer Lav Yitzchak. Yitzchak, his father, said to him, please come closer and kiss me, my son. This is all right before he's about to give these blessings. Yaakov comes closer and he kissed him. Isaac smelled the fragrance of what he thought was his garments, and he blessed him and he said, look, the fragrance of my son is like the fragrance of a field which God has blessed. Every detail in the Torah is important, of course. So here, what does this mean? Why is it even necessary for us to tell us that he smelled him, and that he said to him that he smelled the fragrances like the fragrance of a garden that God has blessed? So Rashi says that here too, Rashi, the Uber commentator on the Torah, says that Nichnas imo ruach shel Gan Eden, that the fragrance that came in with Jacob when he entered into receive the blessings from his father was the fragrance of the Garden of Eden. An amazing fragrance. So here we have the wine of the Garden of Eden. We have the fragrance of the Garden of Eden. The aroma was absolutely wonderful. Okay? Almost like a good cup of coffee. L'chaim. So this whole story, there are so many questions and there are so many commentaries that address this story. Today I want to focus a little bit on a class that I heard and saw from Rabbi Jacobson, with a little sort of additions here and there, as we've already begun. But Rabbi Jacobson gave a class, and I do not recall which commentary he based it on, but it's also based on stuff that is mentioned in the Medrash. So let's begin with a couple of questions over here, and we shall try to answer and address, and hopefully we will all come away inspired, more educated, etc. What's this, as I just asked, what's this business of him smelling as begadav, smelling his garments? There is a very overarching question over here. Why in general does Rebecca have to deceive her husband and put on the clothing of her son Esau as to disguise Jacob so that he could receive the blessings? Did she not communicate with her husband? Could she not have said to her husband, listen, my dear husband, Mr. Or Rabbi or Honorable Yitzchak, let me tell you something. You think that Esau over here is the fellow that should be receiving, the child of ours that should be receiving the blessings. Let me tell you, he is not the person you should be giving the blessings to. You should be giving the blessings to Jacob. He's the real mensch. He is the father, the future father of a great nation. Couldn't she communicate that with her husband? Why this whole ruse? Why this whole deception? What's going on over here? There are many answers to the question. On every level of Torah, on a literal level, on a homiletic level, on a mystical level. Let's try to give somewhat the homiletic level over here as we address this question. Because there's also a mystical level, maybe for another time. On a homiletic level, and somewhat on a pshat level, Rebecca over here knew the following. She felt that if she would go ahead and have a discussion with her husband regarding who should get the blessings, she could perhaps convince him that Jacob is the worthy one to get the blessings. However, if Jacob would get the blessings as Jacob is Jacob, Rebecca said that this blessing, which was a blessing for Jacob and all his offspring throughout history, would only apply to the Jacob and his children that are Jacob-like, who are pious, who are holy, who appear like Jacob, who when you look at them, you see holiness, you see goodness. What about the descendants of Jacob, who outwardly appear very much like Esau, who unfortunately and outwardly has many levels of how you could describe outward versus inward, who at the very core of their soul, they are a Jacob. They have that godly soul that God blew within us, but outwardly they appear like Esau. They have the clothing of the Esau. Will they also receive the blessing, this powerful blessing? As we see later the details of the blessing, this powerful blessing, will they also receive this blessing that Isaac is about to give his son? And Rebecca came to the conclusion, and from the Torah we see that her actions were right and were accepted, because later on, after Isaac finds out that actually Yaakov deceived him, he doesn't say, if that's the case, I pull back the blessings, and the blessings don't count because I gave it to someone who I didn't know I was giving it to. Isaac actually says, Gam Baruch Yeh, the blessings, I concur that he should have the blessings. So we see Rebecca's actions were accepted. We don't find that they had a fight, and that Isaac rejected Rebecca's actions. On the contrary, he went along and he endorsed it. So Rebecca's actions as a mother, what she wanted is that not only the perfect Jacob, but even the descendant of Jacob, who appears like the Esau, should also be getting the blessing. And that's like a wonderful explanation, and has real down-to-earth applications. And I want to say that in two directions somewhat. But before I go there, I want to give one other insight over here, and then a story. So stay with me over here. We mentioned before that he smelled bigodav, he smelled his clothing, and he said, Rei reach b'ni, see, the smell of my child is like a garden, like this, the field of the Garden of Eden that God blessed. So, on a homiletic interpretation over here, beged means a garment. In Hebrew, the same letters, the Torah itself has no vowelization. So often we find, besides the simple pshat, simple interpretation of a word, we also find sometimes homiletic and even halachic discussion on a word that, if you take the letters, can be vowelized in a different way, and actually, as a result, is translated differently. So the word beged, which is a bet, a gimel, and a daled, can also, if you change the vowelizations, can be read boged. Boged means a traitor. Boged means a rebel. Boged, livgod, means to rebel, to a traitor is called a boged. And vayorach esreach bogdav begadav could also be read vayorach esreach bogdav, that Isaac smelled the aroma, the pleasant aroma of the traitors. What does that mean? So the Medrash relates the following story. The story is told about a fellow, his name was Joseph Machisa was his name. This Yosef Machisa, during the times of the Roman destruction, conquer of Jerusalem and Israel, and when they destroyed Jerusalem, they destroyed the temple, this Yosef Machisa was a collaborator of the Romans. He totally rebelled and separated himself from his people, to the extent that while thousands of Jews were slaughtered on the streets of Jerusalem, where the prophet compares that to rivers of blood that were flowing, Jerusalem was in flames and burning. This Yosef Machisa was asked by his Roman friends, an army, that he give them a tour of the Holy Temple on Temple Mount, the holiest of the holiest of Jewish sites, holy sites, which is mentioned hundreds and hundreds of times in the Tanakh, in the prophets, and in scriptures, in the writings. So Jerusalem, the holiest place for Jews, and the temple, the holiest of the holiest. So they asked him, since they wanted to pillage and steal from the coffers and all the utensils, they were made of pure gold, etc., etc. So they asked him to give them a tour of the holy and the Holy of Holies, where only the high priest would enter once a year on Yom Kippur. And he said, sure. And they told him that as a reward, he could take any vessel he wants, he could take for himself. He gives them a tour. On his way out, he takes the menorah. The menorah, we're coming up to Hanukkah soon. He takes the menorah as a reward. When he comes out, they tell him, we want you to go in and take something else. We want you to take something else as a reward. And to their surprise, he says to them, I'm not going back in. Why aren't you going back in? He says, I've angered God. I've angered my God once. I am not going to anger him again. This was an atheist. This was a fellow who totally abandoned his heritage, his beliefs. They were surprised, but this was not, if the Roman tells you something, that's not a choice. You got to do it. They say, we command you to go back in. He says, I'm not going back in. I angered my God once, I'm not going to do it again. They started to beat him. He refused. They started to torture him. He refused. They put him on a carpenter's bed of nails and pierced his body with blood oozing out of all over his body. And he sanctified his name for the glory of God. Refused to go back in. And the obvious, deep question over here is, what's going on? Why? What changed over here? From total opposites. One moment he's part of the Romans. He's leading the Romans while his people are being tortured, while everything that's sacred to the Jewish people is being violated. On the other hand, in the next moment, he's giving up his life. And the answer is, when he went into the Holy of Holies, where God's presence is there, his inner core, his soul, the Yaakov, the Jacob that's within, that was so deeply concealed by the outer garments of Esau, all of a sudden started to shine forth. There was a trigger when that great light and holiness and spirituality broke through. All of a sudden it burst out, it burst forth in such infinite power that nothing could sever that connection. And this, the Medrash says, is part of the Vayorach es Reach begadav. Isaac smelled the wonderful aroma of the Garden of Eden with the clothing of his son Jacob, alluding to the fact that he smelled the Bogdav, he smelled the traitors, the rebels, that even they had this inner core that, if triggered, breaks forth and washes away any darkness, any outer garments of Esau. And this has two lessons, important lessons. And Rebecca could foresee this. Rivka foresaw this in how she devised this whole plan. There's two lessons here. One lesson is, this is such an important lesson. We believe that the core of man is good. God blew a soul, Vayipach ba'apav nishmas chaim. When God created Adam, he blew a soul into man. That is the core of every human being. That is the core of who we are. There is an essence of holiness, of godliness. So knowing that in itself should be a guide of how we approach another human being, especially our child. And number two, that we learn from this parsha, is that you need to be wise and know how to bring out that inner core. You're not creating something new within a person. You're not superimposing when you're trying to guide your child or a friend or whoever it is to be a better person, to make better decisions. You're not imposing within them something that is not who their inner core is. You just need to find a way to remove the outer garments of Esau and bring forth that infinite, beautiful, holy light that your child has, regardless of perhaps their difficulties, which can be difficult, but the very knowledge that there's an inner treasure reservoir of fresh holiness and water, Mayim Chayim, living water, should be a way of encouraging you in how you deal with even the black sheep in your family. There's a story of the previous Rebbe, and with that we'll conclude. There's a story with the previous Chabad Rebbe who sent a messenger, an emissary, to Chicago, I believe it was, to go ahead, to knock on doors, to bring some words of inspiration to fellow members of the broader sort of community, and to just bring words of inspiration. And at one point, he came upon an individual who was a wealthy individual. He knocks on the door, and he says, he welcomes them in, and he says, "Who do I write the check out to?" He figured, he usually gets knocks on the door from people who want a donation for the yeshiva, for the institution, and so on. And they said, "We did not come here. This is not what we came here. We did not come here to get a check." It's just, what did you come here for? He says, "We came here to fix the Sefer Torah." What does that mean? Every single letter of a Sefer Torah represents another soul. So the mystics tell us every letter represents a soul. And our job is to fix the Torah, to fix the Bible, the Torah scroll. When it misses a letter, it's not kosher. Our job is to fix the letter. He was very, very impressed, this wealthy sort of entrepreneur, and he was very touched, etc. When they came back to the previous Rebbe and they gave a report of the people they met, they sort of excitedly told them this story, and they were very pleased with their response that they came up with. And the previous Rebbe said a correction, an important correction. This analogy is true, but there's more to it. It's not, there's missing some truth. They are not, every soul is not compared to a written letter, but is compared to an engraved letter, like on the tablets where the letters were engraved. The letter itself, which represents the soul, can never be broken, can never be rendered not kosher in the typical sense. What could happen is that it could be covered with dust. And when it's covered with dust, you might not be able to properly read the letter. What your job was and is to blow away the dust, to reveal the beautiful letter, the beautiful soul that was always wholesome. That is your job. And that is an important sort of critical distinction. So this is part of the message, and it is with this blessing that we come to this week's Torah portion, where we read about Jacob leaving and having to run, needed to escape from his brother's wrath, and he enters into a hostile environment physically and spiritually, and yet he remains wholesome. Because after receiving such power from his mother and father, he's able to survive the challenges that are thrown his way. When we educate our loved ones, our children, with this knowledge and this tremendous inner potency that they have, neshama, we educate them in a way that they can then continue the journey of life and the mission and purpose of life, to make this world a better place, a place which recognizes that there's a creator, a place that recognizes that we have a mission, we have a purpose to make the world around us a better, more spiritually conscious world. We give the kids those tools, then they will be successful in life, both spiritually and materially. Because knowing what your purpose in life is and having meaning in life is so essential and critical to fulfilling our purpose, of course, and also to living a fulsome and meaningful and happy and inner peace life. So may we have that both for ourselves and our kinalach. Thank you for listening. Please share these words of Torah, and Enjoy the cool weather that's out there. Everybody have a fantastic, amazing week.